Hello and welcome to my talk about ant search, where I will go over the search patterns, the influence of experience, and nestmate coordination. And this is pretty much a summary of most of my PhD. So the general question I address is, how do ants search for resources where they don't know their location? And to set you into the right scenario, imagine that you are on a wide meadow like this one, and you're tasked with searching for those little mushrooms. And every time you find one, you have to come back to your home base, which is maybe your tent. Now, what is your strategy? And this is the scenario that I'm also interested in ants. And they search for something like water, new nest sites, competitors or potential intruders into the nest, or of course, food. Now, I study these rock ants, Temnothorax rugacillus, and as the name suggests, they nest in rock crevices. They do not have trade recruitment like most ants that you might be familiar with. So that means that the foraging success of the colony is defined more or less by the search success of every individual forager. We don't really know how the resources are distributed that they're foraging for. So for example, this aphid that you see in the picture here, this is a typical thing that an ant might be scavenging or hunting for. These ants also deposit footprint pheromones, probably passively, wherever they walk over the substrate. And they are being produced by a gland, or they are also maybe cuticular hydrocarbons from the exoskeleton of these ants. Now, before I get to the methods, I want to thank everyone who made this possible. First and foremost, a long list of undergrads and my lab, including my wonderful advisor, Dornhaus. Now, we get whole colonies of this ant from an area and habitat like this. These are the pine forests high up in the desert of Arizona. And then I suck in a whole colony of this ant, and we place it into a artificial nest, pictured like here. And then I put this nest into an arena in which I can track the ants. And this arena has no resources, nothing that they might be interested in. So I'm just interested in the default behavior of these ants. This is a huge arena here, undergrads for scale. So it's about 1,000 times the size of an ant. And after 5 hours of recording, I get Jackson Pollock painting, or at least something that looks very similar to this. So this is just one colony. In the right half, there is a lot of tracks because that's where the nest is. Now, going back to the scenario on the question of how would you search? Maybe you thought you would search in a systematic way, like in a spiral or in a zigzag or a meander like this. And that's exactly what the ants are doing. So here in black is a real ant track that is meandering left and right more or less regularly. And in orange is a simulant or a simulated ant track that has the same base properties as the ant track shown here. And they are doing this on multiple scales. That means if you take a meander like this, you can lay on top of it another layer or scale of meander. And on top of that, you can layer another one. And this is now an actual path of an ant that I got in my data. And what's striking about this example is that there are no path crosses in these 2 or 3 meters that the ant is walking here. So that means that it's probably a very efficient strategy because the ants are packing a lot of search area into a small confined space without searching where they have already searched, so where there is probably nothing. And this is maybe also why we find this across the tree of life in a variety of different organisms, from moths and limpets over dictyostelium slime molds, which don't even have a nervous system, to, in the bottom left, a very old worm. So these are trace fossils that are more than 500 million years old. Even though this is relatively widespread, it's not super common. And so we don't really have a general theory of meandering, like when do animals do this meandering and how do they do this? Going back to the scenario, how does your strategy change after you have learned the area? So maybe after 2 or 3 days of already being in there. you might already know where the best mushroom patches are, or you definitely know how to get back to your home tent wherever you are. And this is a ecologically relevant question because Thermothorax move their nest a lot, so they don't build a lot of their nests. That means that they move any time that this nest is disturbed somehow. They also move into a better nest when they find one around, and they split colonies seasonally. In the spring, they split, and in the fall, they consolidate again. So that means that they move multiple times per year. And every time they move, they have to familiarize themselves with the surrounding to navigate back efficiently and to maybe find resources. So to answer this question of how do they change their movement behavior with familiarity, I track these colonies not over 1 day, but over 3 consecutive days in the same arena, again, over 5 hours each. And this is a visual representation of the results. So on the left, this is on day 1, and on the right, it's day 3. So you can see here that they decrease their exploration activity. So there are fewer ants out on the 3rd day, and they walk farther away from the nest. So the tracks here are more spread out on the 3rd day. And the ants also walk faster, and they walk straighter with increasing familiarity. And all of this is not driven by footprints because we exchanged the paper floor between the 2nd and 3rd day, and we are still seeing the same tendency of increasing straightness and so on from the 2nd and 3rd day. So that means that they're probably learning visual landmarks, or they're learning the resource scarcity so that they don't have to go out as much, but they should search straighter, or they're patrolling or marking their nest entrance in the 1st day. This is the 3rd part. How does your strategy change when you are in a search team? And it's obvious that this is relevant to the ants. So maybe you're thinking you should pay attention to the footprints that the others leave behind in the grass, and you should avoid where they have been because, of course, they have already picked all the mushrooms there. And this is also what seems to be going on in ants, because previous work has shown that ants cover an area more evenly when they are walking on the footprints of their nestmates. So that means that they must coordinate somehow. And there are 2 hypotheses that I investigate here of how they might be doing this. The first is that the ants are turning away from the side where there is a higher concentration of footprints. The second one is that the ants move straighter when they are on footprints, which automatically kind of diffuses them away quicker from these areas. The first hypothesis is not true, as you can see here by the 0 slope. So on the x-axis is the difference of footprint concentration between what the ant senses with her left versus right antenna, and on the y-axis is the turn angle. So if there was some correlation that the ants were turning away or towards higher footprint concentrations, we would have to see some slope. Okay, what about the second hypothesis, that ants move straighter when they are on footprints? This is also not the case, and in fact, ants move less straight when they are on footprints, as you can see from the negative slope in this plot of straightness over footprint concentration. So that is opposite of the hypothesis that we had. So why is that? The first reason I came up with is that it's pretty much just because of geometry and not because of some biological mechanism. And that is a combination of 2 things. So first, there are fewer footprints farther away from the nest, which is definitely the case. As you can see here, the more red it is, the more footprints there are. And that is combined with the fact that there are some ants that move straighter to begin with, and these ants are also moving farther away from the nest, just because of math again. And this is also the case because there's a positive correlation between the mean distance of an ant track and the straightness of it. So those 2 things together lead to a situation like this, where the more squiggly or less straight tracks are staying closer to the nest, where there are naturally also more footprints. So that means that the more even area coverage is probably driven by inter-ant variation and not by direct pheromone avoidance. But even if we control for this, there still is the negative correlation between the footprint concentration and the straightness. And that is because of a second effect. And that is that some areas make ants walk less straight and thus deposit more pheromones there. And what I mean by that is if you look at this horizontal line there in the circle, That is an area or a straight line where there's low straightness, so ants are walking more or less tortuously. And that is coinciding with the position of adhesive tape, 2 or 3 layers of paper beneath the paper layer that the ants are walking on. And that more or less corresponds with the location of high footprint concentrations. So that shows that there is an extreme sensitivity to environmental heterogeneity, and that is a lot more important in the natural habitat than the chemical footprints. Because you can imagine that on the forest floor where these ants are walking around, there's a lot more smells on the ground, and the chemical footprints that they're leaving behind are comparatively minuscule. So this leaves me with the take-homes. First, ants meander regularly, and this leads to a more efficient search. There is more dispersal with an increasing familiarity of the environment, and the ants coordinate more through inter-individual variation than through direct chemical communication. And at this current moment, I myself am also searching, that is, for a postdoc position. So if you know someone who has an offer, then please let me know. Thank you.